So today we are going to be talking about To the Bone, and I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on the movie as a dietitian. Now, if you're watching this on the replay, I just want to let you know a few things. First off, I am going to be holding comments, questions, discussion for the end, so this should be a pretty normal video for you, just to see all of my thoughts and then the discussion at the end. Also, if you're one of my subscribers and you're like, man, I wish I could have been there live, but I didn't know what was happening, make sure that you have the little bell notification clicked. That way you will get notifications when I upload if you want that sort of thing. And then also, feel free to skip ahead a little bit if you are watching this on the replay to the actual talking part. We're going to be waiting a little bit for people to get here live, just for a few minutes, or you can hang out if you want to. But some people are coming on. Oh, Tora is here and says all of your videos rock. Thanks. I'm glad that you're liking them. For the people who are just hopping on, we're going to be talking about To the Bone. And I'm really excited to talk about this because I know there's been a lot of discussion around this movie and whether it's good or not, helpful, harmful, that sort of thing. And I think it's going to be good for me to give you my thoughts on the movie and what I thought after I watched it, but also to hear what you're thinking if you've watched it or if you haven't and why you haven't watched it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We'll wait a little bit for people to get here live, just so everyone can be here from the beginning that wants to be. But I'm excited, and I have some notes here. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to go through my notes and kind of just give you everything that I have and my thoughts, and then we can do discussion and conversation and comments. Now, if you want to leave comments throughout, you can totally do that, but just know that I'm going to be looking at them at the end so we can kind of break up what I think and then get into the discussion part. And if anyone comes on later and is like, why isn't she talking? You can let them know if you're here now what is going on. So I've got my notes here, and I guess we can go ahead and get started. We've got a few people here. But To the Bone is definitely a movie that has gotten a lot of people talking. It does cover the topic of eating disorders, and I know there's been a lot of concern around this, especially coming off of 13 Reasons Why, because that series was also on Netflix and brought up a lot of discussion about the way things were portrayed in that series and whether that was helpful or harmful or a mixture, and there's a lot of that with To the Bone as well. And then also after the To the Bone trailer came out, a lot of people started talking more. So now that the movie's actually out and we can actually watch it, now I wanted to talk about it because I did see a lot of conversation going on, but I also felt like we can't really know until we actually see the movie and see what's going on. So that's what we're going to talk about. So, To the Bone, and I do have my notes here, so if you see me looking down, that's what's going on. Okay, so first off, I'm going to be talking spoilers about the movie. So, if you don't want spoilers because you plan on watching it and you'd rather do it spoiler-free, then maybe come back and watch this after you watch the movie. But I just want to give a little spoiler warning, heads up, just so you know, because I know some people don't want that. I'm one of those people typically. So yeah, first let's talk about what I liked about the movie, because there were some things that I really did like about it, and I thought it did really, really well. So, the first thing I liked is that it showed eating disorder behaviors, but it did it with a purpose. And what I mean by that is I didn't feel like they were showing things just to show them or to be shocking. I felt like when they showed them, it was like, had to do with what was going on in the story, or it was there to teach something maybe about eating disorders that people might not know. And if you haven't dug into the movie, you haven't seen it, it does follow a main character named Ellen who has anorexia, and it's showing a part of her journey through the illness and trying to get better. So a couple examples of them showing the behaviors that I thought did a good thing, or maybe did some educating. One is that there's a scene where in the facility, in the home where she's staying, one of the other people in her program comes back. She had gone to a movie or something that night because she was able to do that, and when she comes in, she wakes up the main character, Ellen, and Ellen sees her kind of like wiping down her body with like, I don't know if it's a washcloth or like some wet ones or something like that. And the character who just came in says that, you know, she ran home. And so that's an example of a behavior that that character did. And then what you see happen is that Ellen, she starts doing crunches or sit-ups in the bed. And so I thought that that was a useful way to show that behavior, because it showed that it could have shown two things. One, that like seeing someone else engage in eating disorder behaviors could, you know, lead someone else to do those same things or do behaviors that they do. So there's kind of that relationship there of seeing something, being triggered by it, and then engaging in behaviors yourself. But I also think that could show too the competitiveness, that can happen with eating disorders. You see someone else doing something and then you decide to do something too. So I thought that was good. Then there's another point where she gets in a fight with Lucas, who's kind of the boy love interest type character in the movie, and we'll talk a little bit more about him later. I have a kitty on the table who wants, Porgy, don't rub on the phone, please, honey. If you see the camera shaking, she's here saying hi. But there's this point where she gets in a fight with him, and they had started to become really close, and it's a big moment in the movie, and she engages in behaviors then. And so it kind of shows that these behaviors aren't just something that someone is doing because they want to, or because it's about vanity or something like that. It's a compulsion. It's something that she's doing to deal with something else. So she's having these feelings because this emotional thing has happened, and then this is her way of coping with those emotions. So I thought that was really good. And it just showed that they're not something, again, that are about vanity or something that someone is choosing to do, but it's a way for someone to deal with maybe something that they're feeling. And they also touched on this in the group counseling scenes in the movie, which I thought was really good. When they were talking about things with the counselor, she brought up that, these things, this eating disorder, no matter, the different people have different eating disorders and different behaviors, but that it's all related to something else, and it's not necessarily about the behaviors themselves. So I thought that was good that it showed that, because I think a lot of times people don't necessarily know that about eating disorders. I also liked that they showed how eating disorder behaviors aren't something that people are just choosing because they're being stubborn, or it's like a choice, they just want to do these things. You see this one character who is also in the same program with Ellen, and she is pregnant. So there's a storyline throughout the movie about how she's struggling with this eating disorder, but she's also pregnant, so she wants to eat and she wants to gain weight. And so that's something she wants because she knows that's what she needs to do for the pregnancy and for the baby. But on the other hand, she still has this eating disorder voice that's pushing her to engage in these behaviors that are the opposite of that. And I like that because it showed that even when someone wants to get better, that there's still that struggle there and that dichotomy between the part of you that wants to get better and the eating disorder voice that doesn't want to get better. So I thought that was really good that character was able to kind of demonstrate that side of things. I also like that there were different types of eating disorders in the program, and they were at different stages as well. So they showed people who had anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, also maybe like OSFED, EDNOS, which is something that doesn't fit into those categories but is still disordered eating. I like that there was that variety of different types because there are different eating disorders, and I think a lot of times people just think anorexia and maybe bulimia to go along with it, but there are a lot of other things too. So I thought it was good that they showed that there isn't just one way, that it can happen in a lot of different ways, and there are different disorders out there. And also, they had someone in the movie who had a tube feeding, had a feeding tube placed, so she's at one stage, and then they also had characters who were maybe starting, they were gaining weight and they were eating more, so you got to see people at different stages in the process and at different points on their journey, which I also thought was a good thing about the movie. Something else that I really liked is that it showed how the main character Ellen, how her family members were affected and how they were dealing or not dealing with the situation at hand. You have a father who's completely absent. The father character never shows up in the movie, which I've seen some people said they didn't like that because they wanted to learn more about him, but I thought that was really effective because he's absent, he's not there. He's not even in the movie because he's just not around. Then you have her mother, who sounds like maybe was trying to help but also doesn't know what to do or how to handle it. And so now she's kind of taken the daughter and left her with the father and her stepmother for them to deal with it. And then you have, her stepmother, who is kind of reacting to this by trying to push Ellen, the main character, into different programs, telling, kind of a message of just eat, or she wants to help, but she also doesn't know how to help. And then her sister, who loves her and wants to help her get better, but is also a kid herself, and is trying to figure out how to be supportive, but not encourage the disorder. There's all these different dynamics, and I really like that it showed how each of these people is trying to deal with this, maybe isn't equipped to deal with this, maybe wants to help but doesn't know how to help, doesn't always say the right things, but it's not that they're bad people, but they also have their own stuff and they're imperfect and they don't necessarily know how to deal with what's going on either. So I thought that was good. And I also like that they showed, you know, some of the family members trying to put blame on each other, putting blame on the doctor, you know, the situation, or even make what Ellen, the main character, is going through about themselves. You see that in the family group counseling situation. You know, you see her mother and her stepmother fighting in the counseling, saying, well, you did this, and that's what happened, and then you did this, and trying to put the blame back and forth, or then turn it on and make it about themselves and their own things that they have going on. And I just thought it was really interesting to see that dynamic, and for this to be, you know, a fictional story based on the writer's own personal experience and things like that. I thought it did a good job of, you know, showing some of those real life dynamics that can happen, or that, you know, someone might be experiencing who's going through an eating disorder. So I thought that was good. I really like that. I also liked that they didn't give a cause. So for the main character Ellen, they never went through and said, here's this straight line, this happened, this happened, this happened, and that's why she has an eating disorder. I liked that because, you know, they touched on different things that might have played a role in this for her. They touched on, you know, some of the family dynamics, her own personality, you know, perfectionist tendencies, things like that. But they didn't try to give that direct, this is the cause. And I've seen some people say that they wanted to know more about that, like how did she get here, what caused it. But I think it was really smart not to do that because, you know, with eating disorders, it's not just one thing. It's multifactorial. There are genetic components, there are environmental components, there are all these different things working together that could lead to someone having an eating disorder. And, you know, for each person, it's going to be different. So even with an individual, it's hard to say this caused it because there's so many different pieces to that puzzle. But especially talking about people as a whole, you can't say, well, if this happens, then you're going to have an eating disorder because there are so many different factors involved. And I thought that was good because I think if you show, like, here's a straight line, this is what happened, it can become, this is what causes eating disorders, this is the thing. And so I like that they left it a little bit vague because it is so different for every single person. And, you know, it's messy. You can't just package it up in a box and say, this is what caused it. Another thing I liked about To the Bone that I thought was helpful was that it touched a little bit on the impact that media can have on the development of these disorders. And some people I know have said they wanted more. I think the movie wasn't really about that, but I'm glad that they included it. One thing they brought up, it was right, like at the very beginning of the movie, is a message that is put out all over the place, that, you know, if you just go on the right diet or if you just lose enough weight, that all your problems will go away and you can finally be happy. And this is something we see a lot in diet marketing, is that, you know, that's the key. It's just if you're thinner or if you eat the right things, then you can finally be happy. And we know that isn't true, but it's something that so many of us are susceptible to believing and wanting it to be true. And then what can happen is people get into this stuff and then they realize that it isn't true, and that can be really harmful. So I like that they touched on that. Also, the main character in the movie, Ellen, she had a Tumblr of her own where she would post her sketches, which were eating disorder related, you know, kind of images that maybe could be considered promoting these types of behaviors. And I like that they touched on that because that is a factor that's out there too. Websites, social media, whether it's things that are indirect, like just images of very thin people and diet messages and things like that, or things that are out there which are very dangerous, which are for the purpose of encouraging eating disorder and eating disorder behaviors. I thought it was good that they touched on that stuff is out there and that is a part of this too, and that those types of things, you know, it wasn't that these things cause eating disorders, but it was showing that they do exist and that they're just another factor along with all the other factors that can influence the development of an eating disorder, or discourage recovery, or maybe make recovery more difficult for someone because we live in this world with all these things around us. So I really like that. Another thing I liked about To the Bone was the character of Lucas, because I think he did demonstrate a few different points. Now, I know he's not super popular for a lot of people, and I don't think he was supposed to be. I don't think he's necessarily supposed to be someone that you like, but I do think his character, because of that, it it showed a lot of things that I thought were good things to touch on. So, you know, he's someone who is in the treatment facility. It's really just a house is the style of treatment. They're in a house together. He's there too, and he's someone who is also recovering from anorexia. And I liked his character because even though he was going through a similar experience and probably could understand what Ellen was going through much better than, you know, maybe her mother or her sister, because he was going through his own experience, but a similar one, being that they were both dealing with anorexia, even though he was there with her on so many of those things and could maybe understand a little bit better, he still wasn't necessarily good. He didn't always say the right things or do the right things because he is just a person too, and he's not perfect, and he didn't handle things well in a lot of cases. You know, he said things that were harmful. He, you know, encouraged some disordered behaviors in some scenes. He pushes himself onto her later in the movie very strongly, and that scene, you know, was difficult because it's just very uncomfortable, and I thought it was good because it showed that, well, it showed a few things. Oh, one more thing I want to touch on that is that when he finds out his dance career is over at the end of the movie, he tells her that he needs her because now he doesn't have his dance career to rely on for his like motivation or his thing to get better, and now she's his thing. And I thought all of that was good because so often you see in movies or television with any type of situation, but, you know, with eating disorders too, when there's this character that is there to save the other person and they're just there to be the savior. And I think this turns that on its head because, you know, it's saying that this is more close to reality, of that there isn't going to be this person to come along and save you or make all your problems better or to do everything perfectly or to always say all the right things or behave in the right way or whatever, because he's an imperfect person. He isn't there to save her, and life is complicated. So I really like that. And I also like that it showed an example of a parasocial relationship. Parasocial relationships are relationships where one person knows a lot, where someone knows a lot about one person, but that person doesn't know the same thing. So like a YouTuber or someone, maybe a celebrity or something, you know, someone could know a lot about that person, has seen a lot of their work, read their interviews, whatever, and so they know a lot about that person, but the celebrity or well-known person doesn't know all that about the other person. And that's an example because in the movie, Ellen's Tumblr is something that she has some notoriety for and is a little bit well known for, and so he had been following her for several years before they ever ended up in the same place. And so he feels like he knows her so well, but she doesn't know him that well. She's only known him for a few weeks. And so it kind of showed that mismatch too, which I thought was kind of interesting to throw that into the movie too. Okay, I also liked how they showed that eating disorder behaviors aren't something that someone is just choosing or that they're doing it to be stubborn, and that even when you want to get better, it can still be challenging. I touched on that a little bit earlier, but again, you see Megan, who is pregnant and wants to eat and gain weight, but she's still struggling. I think that's good. But also, going along with that, they also showed Lucas, who talks about how it isn't easy for him. You know, he wants to get better, but it's not easy for him to eat and to push out that eating disorder voice. So again, I thought that was good, and that was a nice contrast to Ellen, who throughout the movie isn't really interested in getting better. She's not in a place where she wants to do that. So I thought it was good to have a character who's in that place, but also have these characters who are in a place where they do want to get better, but they're still struggling through that process. And that leads to the next thing I liked, which was Ellen's just overall arc in the movie. You know, it wasn't a movie that was about the development of an eating disorder. It wasn't a movie that was about being fully recovered with rainbows and, you know, unicorns and everything's happy at the end and, you know, life is wonderful. It was about her going from someone who didn't want to get better to, by the end of the movie, being someone who did want to get better. The ending was a little bit abrupt, and it might not be. I was surprised. I was like, oh, whoa, it's over? Okay. But I thought that that was good to see that because, you know, we see that she's returning to the facility. She actually wants to do the work now that she needs to do, but we know it isn't necessarily going to be easy for her. We know, especially from seeing the other characters earlier in the movie who were still struggling even though they wanted to get better. because we've seen that, then we know that it's still going to be difficult for her. It's not like everything is smooth sailing, but we still get that hopeful feeling that now she's in a place where she has a much better chance at getting better, and she's ready to do the work that she needs to do. And so I thought that was a really nice take on it, and felt, I don't know, real and true to life as far as the experience that someone might have if they're going through an eating disorder and trying to recover from an eating disorder. So I thought that was good. I also think, we see through the movie that she's going through these motions of recovery, but it was always trying to please other people. So, she's going into a program because that's what her family wanted. So she's kind of just doing what she has to do to keep them kind of happy, but she's not actually doing it for herself. She maybe tries to do things because of Lucas and what he wants her to do, and he's pushing her to do these things. But in the end, it wasn't about making her family happy or a boy coming to save her or whatever. It was about her saving herself, her coming to that place where she wanted to get better for herself. And so I thought that was really nice. Now, there are some things I didn't love about the movie, so we can get into those because the movie was not perfect. One thing is that I wish that there had been a little more diversity with the other people in the program that she was in. I wish there had been more diversity as far as people who were different body sizes. There was one character who was larger, but she was also the character who had binge eating disorder. And I think it kind of goes into that misconception that people with eating disorders are always thin. Not all the characters were as thin as Ellen's character was, but they were all pretty small. And so, I think oftentimes people don't realize that someone could look healthy, quote unquote, or even overweight and still have an eating disorder, and it's not necessarily binge eating disorder. And I think that that's important to show that variety, because I know the movie is just trying to show one person's story. They're trying to show Ellen and what she's going through. She has anorexia, but she's also extremely thin, and that is a version of what an eating disorder could be. But I also think we need to make sure that we aren't just showing one version of eating disorders and giving the impression that that's the only thing that an eating disorder looks like. Because sometimes I think we focus on maybe that sort of presentation, the very thin presentation, because it is more visually shocking. So as far as media goes and talking about these things, it does get a little bit more attention. So I think that's why it's used a lot, but we have to remember that that isn't the only way that it can show up, even though it is a powerful image for getting people to watch a show or watch a movie or to talk about things. And I worry that if we focus on that too much, the very, very thin way that an eating disorder can look, and we focus on that, it can have a negative impact because, eating disorders, they are a real thing. They're a dangerous thing for people who still aren't that thin. And I think if all we see is people who are very thin, then for people who have eating disorders, maybe they get the idea that they don't need treatment because their eating disorder isn't bad enough yet. It's not to that point, so I'm fine, nothing's wrong, when actually it's still they still need help. And then I also think that for the general public, maybe if they just see that sort of very, very thin image, that they might not really understand that people can be all shapes and sizes with eating disorders, and they might not recognize eating disorders in those that they're close with, or, if the extremely low weight isn't there, they might not understand the seriousness of it. And so I think that is something we need to remember, is that people with eating disorders, they come in all shapes and sizes. It's not just one way that someone can look with an eating disorder, and that we need to make sure we're not perpetuating that misconception, because it can be harmful and lead people to maybe not get appropriate treatment, or people to not understand how serious the condition is, even without that type of weight loss. Now, I do think the movie took a step in the right direction by showing the different types of eating disorders, but I guess I just like to see more. So I feel like it was good, but I would have liked a little bit more from that. Another thing that I wasn't a fan of was that it isn't necessarily a good representation of what eating disorder treatment is like in the movie. Into the Bone, they are in this house where they're kind of given free range with food. No one really talks about it. They can kind of just eat whatever they want or not eat or whatever. And that just isn't typical for what treatment would be like. There would be a lot more structure around the food. and, you know, getting people to eat and dealing with those types of issues, the food-specific issues. And that wasn't really in the film. Now, I do realize that they do mention in the movie that this is supposed to be like an alternative doctor. He does things a little bit differently. And also Ellen comments on the fact that having not all that structure around the food, that's not typical, because before the movie, she has been through several different programs previously and gotten kicked out. So she kind of knows what the typical is. So they do mention that it isn't typical. But I wonder if people get the wrong idea of what it might be like to be an eating disorder treatment. But I also think that I understand maybe why they would have done that for the story for the movie, because maybe if you focus on the food as part of the treatment too much, then the movie just becomes about food, and they wanted to explore the deeper underlying things that are going on and not focus on the food so much, which can happen when you talk about eating disorders. It all just becomes about the food stuff, and you don't explore these other things. So I kind of understand that. Another thing I didn't like was the emaciated body shot. So there are several scenes in the movie where you see, you know, the main character Ellen looking very, very thin, you know, seeing bones and things like that. I kind of wish that hadn't been in there. I understand that it can be used to show maybe the severity of her condition, but I don't think it's necessary to communicate that. I think you can communicate that, you know, that this is severe by the fact that she's been through, I think it's something like 4 treatment programs, but by the time the movie starts, she's already been through 4 different programs. I think that says a lot. I think the fact that she hasn't had her period, she can't remember the last time she had her period, that says a lot. You know, just seeing the thinness in her face, she mentioned that she has also had a feeding tube placed before. I think all of those things communicated that this was serious, that she had a serious eating disorder. And I don't know that we needed to see the emaciated body stuff to understand that. And again, it kind of goes along with the idea that for an eating disorder to be severe, you have to be very thin. So I didn't like it for that reason. But I think, you know, if you're going to show those images, they at least did a good job about it. I still don't think they were necessary, because we've seen those images so many times within the context of eating disorders, but I at least did feel like when they put them in the movie, it was for a purpose and not just to show the shocking thing. So that's what I think about that. Another thing that has been talked a lot about is the fact that Lily Collins, who plays the main character Ellen, lost weight for the movie, and she is someone who has a history of an eating disorder, and a lot of people are talking about, you know, how that is irresponsible for her to be encouraged to do that, or, you know, did the people making the movie require her to do that for the role? Now, from what I've seen in interviews, she wasn't forced to do that. That was something that she decided to do on her own. So that is something, but it still doesn't seem wise to me. Now, I don't know her specific situation, but just speaking generally, any sort of dieting or weight loss effort can trigger a relapse for someone who has a history of an eating disorder. So it's something that is concerning. And also, just when she's talked about it in interviews, she says that she did it with the help of a nutritionist in the healthiest way possible. And I think that also spreads a message that there is a healthy way to try to lose weight, especially for someone who has a history with an eating disorder. And that's not the case. You know, it's not something that you can do healthfully. And so I worry that, you know, people can see that maybe who have a history of eating disorder or who are in recovery, and say, well, she has a history of an eating disorder, but she was still able to lose weight and did it in a healthy way. So that means I can too. And that's a very tempting thing for people with eating disorders to feel like, well, that person did, I'll just do this one more time. Like, I'll just do some of this, or just do it just enough that it's not as bad as it could be, or something like that. And so that's the concern there, is that it could encourage that type of behavior. Something else just about the movie in general, I felt like we didn't get to know some of the characters very well, especially the doctor played by Keanu Reeves. And I know it was hard because I think, you know, they wanted to focus on Ellen, but you also have all these other characters in the house, a lot of them that we didn't get to know very well. There's the Lucas relationship they're trying to put in there. But to me, it just seemed like the doctor character kind of floated in and out, but I didn't really know, I didn't feel like he had a strong relationship with the characters, and I guess he was supposed to, but he was just kind of in, and then he was gone, and whatever. And so I felt like maybe the scenes with him didn't have the impact that they could, because I just didn't really feel attached to him or understand how he was really that attached to the other characters in the movie. And then another thing, just kind of more about the movie itself as a movie, is I felt like parts of the story were a little cliche, a little formulaic. I saw some things coming, so I didn't think that was great. Just a few things that just kind of seemed like, okay, I see where this is going. Now, let's talk about the issue. So that's kind of what I liked and what I didn't like about To the Bone. Let's talk about the big issue around this, which is, you know, is it responsible to put out a movie like this, especially when these sorts of images, seeing, you know, an emaciated figure, seeing someone engage in eating disorder behaviors, you know, that could be triggering for someone who has a history of an eating disorder. And should things like that be out there? That has been a big topic of conversation. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So I would definitely say if there's someone out there who is currently, you know, struggling with an eating disorder or is on the verge of one or is in a place in their recovery where, you know, if they see some of these behaviors, if they hear, you know, calorie counts or weights, or if they see someone who looks very thin, if that could be triggering for them, then they shouldn't watch this movie because all that stuff is in there. So I think that, you know, first up, we just have to address that people who are in that situation shouldn't be watching the movie. Because that stuff's all there, and I think it could be hard for someone who is in that place to go through that. Also, I think it could be hard for someone maybe who hasn't had an eating disorder themselves, but who has had someone close to them who has. Just to see some of those things might bring back memories of things like that. So also for those people, you know, if someone feels like they're in a place where that would be upsetting to them, maybe they shouldn't watch the movie. But with that said, I don't think that means that a movie like this shouldn't be made or that it should skirt around the topic. Because, you know, not everything is going to be for everyone. I think, yes, there are people whom for watching this movie could be harmful or could be triggering, but there are also a lot of people who could find this movie helpful. And I think for someone who maybe is in a place where they're in their recovery where things like this aren't an issue for them, aren't triggering for them, then seeing, you know, maybe a version of your story being told, that could be a nice experience. And I also think for people who aren't familiar with eating disorders or who just have a limited knowledge, it could be helpful for them to, you know, kind of learn about some of these behaviors, learn a little bit about, you know, why they might happen, see some of the different forms that eating disorders can come in, learning that they aren't about vanity or that you can't just tell someone, you know, just to eat, or that something I see a lot of times people say, you know, well, I love food, so I can never have an eating disorder. You know, that's not what an eating disorder about, is whether or not you like food or not. That's not how that works. So I think something like this could be helpful for those people too, just to educate them a little bit. And I know some people also have concerns over a movie like this becoming some sort of like inspiration in the sort of pro-eating disorder community, which again is very dangerous. And I think it will definitely be used in that way, for sure. I don't think there's any question about that. But I also think if this movie wasn't there, there's still plenty of material to work with. I feel like, you know, with all of the diet and weight loss information that's just out there and is such a part of our culture and just the way we talk about things, and all of the imagery out there in general of very thin people and dieting and stuff like that, this movie just seems like a drop in an ocean of this type of material. And I feel like at least this is educating about the issue. So I feel like there's so much stuff already out there. People are already using this. If this movie wasn't here, it would still be out there. It would still be happening. So at least this is, you know, talking about the issue and maybe educating some people who don't know a lot about it. Now, I think specifically there's a concern with the emaciated images, which, like I said earlier, I wish those hadn't really been in there, because with things like that specifically, there can be this race to the bottom effect where someone sees that and then that's kind of proof to them, like, well, that person is that thin and they're still alive, so that's my new benchmark or my new goal of what to look like or what weight to be or how much to eat or whatever. So those images can have that effect, and that's one of the reasons why I think they shouldn't have really been in the movie, because they can be really harmful, and I don't think that they were necessary for the story at all, and as far as communicating the things that they wanted to communicate. But I also understand that it is a movie, they want to get people to watch it, and having the shock factor of those types of images could be what brings someone into the movie, and then they're there to get the messages and the story that the movie wants to tell. But I wish that those things hadn't been in there. And I also think it's good that this is starting a conversation. Like, at the very least, people are talking about it. And I don't think that, you know, just because something starts a conversation that we should just take that and be like, well, didn't represent this topic very well, but it got people talking, so we just need to accept it. I don't agree with that kind of mentality. But I also think that, you know, this movie, it had some good things in it. It is getting people talking, and I don't think it was like just glamorizing or just like shock factor or whatever. I feel like it was really trying to address some of these issues and educate people about it and get people talking. Also, there is a warning at the beginning of the movie, you know, that this contains material that might not be appropriate for everyone. And I think, you know, people know what this movie is about. They know what's going to be in there. They have that warning. So it's not like people are going in blind and don't know what is going to be contained in the movie. So if someone is in a place where they shouldn't watch it, or at least shouldn't watch it right now, they should be able to tell that based on all the information that's out there and just, you know, what the movie is about in general. And I think this is one movie that tells one story, and it's not going to it's not going to reflect every eating disorder experience. It can't show every different possibility that's out there and every individual's experience, because no movie can do that, and it also isn't going to be perfect. But I think overall it had a lot of elements that I thought were effective and helpful at showing some of the nuance and the underlying issues, and how these things maybe can happen, or what someone with an eating disorder might be going through. I think it did give a good look at some of those things, and at least it's a step in the right direction. I hope we'll see more things that are talking about these types of issues, that are able to do it in this way and also do it better than this movie did. So To the Bone, I think it's good. I think it had a lot of good points. I think there are definitely some negatives with it. As a movie on its own, I thought it was okay. There were things about it that were effective. There were things about it that seemed cliche to me, or I kind of saw coming, but it was fine as far as just looking at it as a movie. So that's kind of all of my thoughts. Now that I've talked forever and you guys have listened to me talk, I want to talk to you and see what you have to say about it. So let me know if you've watched the movie and what you thought about it if you did watch it. And also, if you are choosing not to watch the movie, maybe why you have chosen not to. And also, any other thoughts? Do you agree with what I said? Did you disagree? I'll be looking here in the comments and going back and seeing what you guys said over the course of the stream. Okay. All right, so Tora asks, is this movie similar to Supersize Me? So no, it's not similar to that. Supersize Me is a documentary, and it's more talking about diet for health and things like that, and what the impacts of different types of food could be. This is a fiction, so it's a story based loosely on some of the experiences of the person who wrote it, but it's following, you know, a main character, Ellen, and kind of showing a section of her story and her experience with anorexia. Oh, people are having discussions. That's not an essential oil diffuser. That is a Google Home. So good job, Jesus, on that one. That is a Google Home. How do you fix an eating disorder? Well, for eating disorders, that's from Tora. Eating disorders are complicated. Eating disorders require a team of experts. People, depending on how severe the eating disorder is, it might be outpatient counseling. So, you know, you have your doctor who's seeing you, but you're also seeing a therapist and you're also seeing a dietitian. There are several people involved because there's so many pieces to that puzzle and so many things that need to be worked through. So those are kind of the basics, you know, your medical team, your therapist, and your dietitian. But depending on the severity, someone might be in an inpatient facility, hospitalized. It just depends on how severe things are for that individual. But that's kind of the process. And then it's about working through the underlying issues, working through the food issues, and dealing with some of the health consequences that can come from eating disorders. Nita and Kasia? Am I saying your name right? I hope so. Both said hi. Hi to you guys. Nita says, I thought it went too fast. No history on how it started for her. Okay, that's a good thought, Nita, because I have seen some people say that they wish they could have seen more how it happened, and it just kind of jumped into it. And I understand that, but as I mentioned earlier, I kind of like that it was vague, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there as far as maybe showing the descent into something, or showing this like, oh, we're coming through it and we're getting out. But I like this because it was kind of that middle part, like kind of right before someone hits bottom and then when they just start to do the upswing. I felt like that's what this movie showed, and I thought that was kind of interesting because it wasn't about saying this is why it happened, this is what went on, you know, it was XYZ and then she had anorexia. It was just like, this person's here and there were a lot of factors back here, and you can kind of see some of that happening, but we're going to show you the process of her going from not wanting to get better to wanting to get better. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But I understand that too. Sometimes you feel like maybe you don't know the character that well, or you feel like, oh, we're just jumping into this and like, why do I care? What's going on? So I could totally see that maybe it's a little bit harder to connect with her and care about what she's going through if you don't have a little bit more of that history. Teresa says, I totally agree with you. There's no healthy way to get super bone skinny. What about her health in the future? So scary. I've seen it in my career as an RN. 2 women died from it. Yeah. And now I do know that some of the shots in the movie, the ones that were where she was very thin, there was definitely CGI makeup going on. And I think I read somewhere that there was also a body double. So if that, wherever I read that, if that was accurate, of someone who's currently in an eating disorder already, to show some of those shots. So the ones where it's very thin, that isn't necessarily the actress. She didn't get that thin for the role. But any amount of, you know, someone with an eating disorder past trying to lose weight, it's definitely risky. And, you know, like I said, I can't speak to her specific situation, but generally it is a risky thing. And I do worry about people thinking that that's a thing that someone could do healthfully, or that would be a good idea for someone to do, especially someone with a history of an eating disorder. Also, I thought it was interesting, I saw there was an interview where Lily Collins, who plays Ellen, she said that she actually got compliments when she was losing weight for the movie to become underweight for this role, and someone complimented her and saw her, said, oh, whoa, you look really great, like whatever you're doing, you got to tell me and I've got to start doing it. And she said that's what she felt like, okay, we definitely need to make this movie, because that is a part of it. Like, we have this thin ideal where thinner is better and skinnier is better, is the kind of message that a lot of times we get in just society overall, from media, all those sorts of things. And so for someone to see her at a weight where she was trying to look like someone who has severe anorexia, and someone to think that that was good and you got to tell me your tips and your tricks, I think is really telling and speaks to the broader issues that need to be addressed and dealt with. Okay. Someone's asking about ketogenic diet. We're not talking about ketogenic diet today. We're talking about this movie, but we could get to that maybe a little bit later. That is a video that I'm wanting to do, though, is to talk a little bit about that, because I know that is something that a lot of people are doing, a lot of people have questions about, so that is on my list. Just know that. Butterfly Planner says, such a great critique. I'm definitely going to check it out now. I was on the fence. Yeah, I think, you know, if you're in a place where you feel like you can watch it and it's not going to, you know, if you've never dealt with an eating disorder, or if you feel like you're in a place where maybe you have, but you feel like you can see something like this, you know, it's very individual. So know yourself, and also be prepared. Maybe watch it with someone else or turn it off if it's not good. But I think it's worth a watch if it's not going to be an issue for you, because I think it is pretty well done overall as far as portraying the different things but not being gratuitous about it, and it is interesting. So I think it's worth a watch. I'm sorry, worried I'm gonna say this wrong. Arvticoast, you know who you are if I'm saying your username wrong. I was hoping there would have been a follow-up during the end. So do you mean a follow-up for the character, or a follow-up sharing some more information? Because I do think it definitely did end abruptly, and you're just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess it's over, she's going back to treatment. But I did like that part of me liked that it didn't show like her getting better, because I felt like it it was still an unknown of what was going to happen, but it was also interesting, and I thought kind of showed what recovery is really like, that it's not a straight line, you know, and by seeing the other people that were in the program, you could see some of them, you know, were doing better, and then they were doing worse, and that, you know, these things can be a little bit of a process. I will say, I wish there had been something after the movie, like a follow-up message or video with the cast or something. I was kind of hoping for that, to maybe talk about, like, resources for information or places to discuss the movie further, or maybe interviews. They did that with 13 Reasons Why. They had a video at the end just talking about the film overall. I would have liked to have seen that. Also, kind of going along with that, the cast did do a PSA that if you search for, you can find, and I will link it here too after the live stream is over for anyone watching on the replay. But it's a PSA from the cast talking about, like, the 9 truths about eating disorders, and I thought that was good. I was glad that they did that, and I thought maybe that could be something that could be at the end, just extra material, so maybe the audience isn't left hanging, but now they know, okay, I've learned this, maybe if I didn't know anything before, and now where can I go further to continue the conversation and keep it going and helping people to continue to learn about this important issue. I really would have liked to have seen something like that. Nita, that's an interesting point. Didn't see it that way. Yeah, and I think, you know, there's definitely, I agree with you about wanting the history, because I think it is hard to relate to her, but I also like that they didn't have it. So it's kind of, I could see it going either way, but for this movie, I thought it was good. And Nita also says, I thought the boy was a little bit scary and he was codependent. Yes, I totally agree. And I liked that because, again, it wasn't that person coming in to save her. It was someone who was really behaving in a lot of ways that weren't healthy. Now, I guess the one concern with that is if people watching don't realize that he wasn't doing things in a healthy way, or that it was like a codependency thing, or that, you know, things weren't right, then maybe they could get the idea that this is what a great relationship looks like and this is what should happen. But I think from at least most people talking about it, that they could tell that they didn't like him, and that he definitely wasn't necessarily doing things the way that he should have been, or that would have been best for her. So I found that really interesting, and I kind of liked it, because it is a nice flip from sometimes you see these people who just do everything right and they're there to help the person, but in real life, most people don't have that person. Most people don't do everything exactly right because people don't know, and people are just people. Okay. Why is it so hard to eat healthy? Well, I think that's a topic that we could maybe do a whole video about. But it's different for everyone. It has to do, I think, with habits. I think it has to do with, you know, there's all kinds of reasons why we eat certain things or don't eat certain things. So it's multifactorial. It has to do with our habits. It has to do with why we're eating, what we're eating, what we have access to, finances, our environment, how our cooking skills, all those kinds of things. Nita says, I suffer from depression, so his personality overwhelming me just looking at his behavior. Yeah, I think, yeah, he definitely seemed like overwhelming and just like a lot to handle. And I thought that was done pretty well. Okay, and let me know if you guys have any other comments on, I was going to say 13 Reasons Why, on To the Bone. Definitely leave those. I'm going to go into some of the other off-topic things now so we can talk a little bit. Storm3 PSN says, can you talk about your experience with taking biochemistry? Biochemistry was not my favorite class in college, I'm not going to lie. I preferred organic chemistry. And I think it was a few different things. My organic chemistry teacher was amazing. My biochemistry teacher was fine, but I felt like it wasn't as easy for me to understand. But then when it was applied to my nutrition metabolism classes, I was totally into it. So I think it was a little bit of like, it was interesting, but it wasn't about the things I wanted to talk about. So it wasn't biochemistry about people. It's like we're talking about this random bacteria and whatever. It's like, okay, this is interesting, but can we talk about like humans? Because that's what I want to learn about. So I think that was part of it. But, you know, I did it and I learned what I need to learn so I could get on to the nutrition metabolism and, you know, humans specifically, rather than biochemistry just as a whole. Nita says, I think society tells us healthy tastes bad too, which is not true. Yeah, that's definitely true. You know, there's definitely this message that if it tastes good, it's not healthy for you, and if it's healthy, it tastes bad, which certainly isn't true. That's actually something I talked about in my last video, so I'll link that for you if you want to go check it out. It's such an idea that I hear all the time from so many people, and it just isn't the case, and I think it gets in the way of a lot of people being able to just like enjoy different a variety of foods, and eat in a way that makes their body feel good. So something we got to work on. Tora asks, is it true there's healthier options for fast food? Yeah, I mean, no matter where you go to eat, there's always, a little bit better options available. But I also think, different restaurants have a little bit better. Just because something is fast and quick and convenient doesn't mean that it's unhealthy. But a lot of the times, the food that we get at those types of restaurants maybe isn't the food that we want to eat all the time to feel well. So whether that's things you make yourself that are just quick or convenient, or getting those options that are going to be a little bit more aligned with what's going to make you feel good, and help support you in whatever your goals are. There's always options at different places, and some have more options than others, but you can work with what you got. Nita asks also, organic, grass-fed, fresh food super expensive. I don't understand why, but at least in NYC this is true. Yeah, sometimes fresh foods are more expensive. Grass-fed, 100% grass-fed beef is more expensive than grain-fed beef. And that's for a few different reasons. One of the big ones being that it takes a lot longer for a cow to get to weight for slaughter on grass than on corn. Corn fattens them up real quick, even though it's not what they should be eating, and it's damaging to their health and damaging to our health and all these other things, but it's a lot faster, so you're paying for a little bit of that time element is in there. Also, the efficiencies of the system, that can play a role. If the corn-fed beef is just on a larger scale, it's just kind of like your mom and pop store versus the big box store. There are certain efficiencies in that big box store that can make it cheaper, or maybe the way that they do things that, the smaller store isn't going to do or isn't able to do. So I think there's some of that going on. Also, corn, the corn that cows are fed, that is subsidized by the U.S. government. So at least in the U.S., that's also a factor, is that you're getting this artificially cheap feed for these animals, even though grass is something that doesn't even need to be planted or harvested, it's just growing. But because we have the subsidies going to the corn, then that plays a factor. Plays a role, it's a factor in the whole process. So that's one of the things there. And then also, I think sometimes too, time is a factor just for us personally. So a lot of times eating well and eating more like whole foods that you prepare yourself, they're not always more expensive, but they do require time on the individual to prepare them. And depending on your situation, and if that time is available to you, that's a cost. Even though it's not a money cost, as in you're not paying for it, your time is money. And if you're maybe someone who has to work a couple jobs or whatever, that's a factor too. And then also people have different priorities as far as how they want to spend their time. So that's definitely something that comes into play. But I think I'm going to stop us here for today. That's everything I had to say about To the Bone. I definitely want to hear any more thoughts you have in the comments after this live stream is over, or if you're watching this on the replay, leave that, because I'd love to talk to you about it a little more. And I think it's something that, it's good that we're having these conversations and talking about these issues and talking about movies like this. And I think this movie definitely had some good parts. It had some parts I didn't love, but I don't think it's all good or all bad. And I think it could definitely, it could lead to more productive discussions and maybe even more information and media out there that could be helpful. So if you would like to watch some more videos, I will link a couple more over here that you might enjoy, so that you can go watch those. Also, if you came on here late and you wanted to be here right when the live stream started, make sure you click the bell notification, the bell next to the subscribe button. That's how you get notifications. And it's just there if you want to be here for these things live. But that's it. I am going to go make dinner now. I hope you guys are having a great evening. Bye, Nita. Bye, Tora. Bye, everyone. And I will talk to you later. Bye.